A child is sitting in a classroom right now, staring at a blank board, waiting for a bell to ring. They have absolutely no idea that for 99% of human history, that classroom did not exist. That bell did not exist, that teacher at the front did not exist, and yet, our ancestors survived. How did every generation before us manage to pass down everything they knew without a single school? They passed down complex languages, survival skills, and the knowledge of which plants would kill you. They taught each other how to track an animal across miles of open land and how to stay alive. So, when did humans actually start educating themselves? We are not asking when we built the first schools, because that is the easy question to answer. The much harder question is this: when did the first human decide that knowledge was worth passing on? The earliest evidence of intentional teaching does not come from a building or a written record. It comes from stone tools dating back over 1.5 million years ago. These ancient stone tools show something absolutely remarkable across generations. The Acheulean hand axe found across Africa, Europe, and Asia shows a perfectly consistent design. This shape remained precise over hundreds of thousands of years, which proves direct teaching existed. Someone watched someone make an axe, copied the technique, and then showed someone else. For over 1 million years, the same tool was made the same way because knowledge was deliberately passed on. This is exactly what education looked like for most of human existence. It was not a modern classroom, but a direct physical demonstration. It was a child watching an adult's hands closely, copying the movement, failing, and trying again. They were corrected not with spoken words, but with a gentle repositioning of fingers or a redirected strike. Around 300,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens first appeared, humans lived in tiny bands. These groups consisted of only 15 to 50 people, and the elders were the living library. If you wanted to know which plants were safe during a brutal drought, you asked a survivor. You went directly to the oldest person who had successfully survived the last major environmental crisis. Knowledge was stored entirely inside living people, and when those people died, that knowledge died too. The only way to keep the tribe alive was to ensure information was passed on above all through story. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner analyzed hundreds of hours of recordings from the Jew/Hoansi people. They represent one of the oldest continuous living cultures remaining on Earth today. She discovered that 81% of nighttime conversation around the fire was storytelling. They shared ancient myths, ancestor tales, and deep moral lessons wrapped beautifully in narrative. This captivating fireside storytelling was the original human curriculum. It required no physical room, just a warm fire. It required no certified teacher, just a voice in the dark carrying vital information forward through time. And evolutionary biology tells us exactly why children were built to receive this information. Chimpanzees become nutritionally self-sufficient within just a few years of being weaned. In stark contrast, human children take up to 18 years to become fully independent. Evolutionary biologists argue that this incredibly long dependency is not a biological flaw. In fact, they believe it is the core design of our species. The extended human childhood exists purely as a dedicated, sacred window for learning. Every other species learns to survive quickly by relying on basic instinct. Humans learn to accumulate knowledge across generations and build something no other species ever could. We build a collective culture that compounds and grows stronger over time. What that primitive education produced is clearly visible in our archaeological record. Around 100,000 years ago at Blombos Cave in South Africa, researchers found something beautiful. They discovered tiny perforated shell beads and carefully processed ochre pigment. These ancient objects required multiple, deliberate steps to successfully produce. The ochre had been ground, mixed, and stored safely inside abalone shells. The delicate shells themselves had been carefully and intentionally pierced. These beautiful artifacts were absolutely not accidents of nature. They were the products of a complex process that had to be learned, practiced, and remembered. The specific knowledge of how to create them had to come from an experienced teacher. Someone possessed the skill, and someone successfully passed it on to the next generation. Then, around 36,000 years ago at Chauvet Cave in France, a massive leap occurred. Someone painted stunning horses, fierce lions, and heavy rhinoceroses on the cold stone walls. They did this with incredible perspective, depth, and anatomical accuracy that shocked modern researchers. When the cave was discovered in 1994, scientists could not believe the artistic sophistication. We cannot say with absolute certainty that a teacher guided a student's hand on that wall. But what we can say is that whoever made those paintings spent years developing that specific skill. Skills that sophisticated do not just appear fully formed in a single individual. They accumulate slowly through endless practice, close observation, and being around masters. The knowledge existed within the community long before it manifested in the individual. That is the true definition of education, even without a formal name for it. Then, around 10,000 years ago, the invention of agriculture changed everything forever. Humans stopped moving across the land and started farming permanent plots. As a result, human populations grew exponentially, and societal complexity exploded. A farmer suddenly needed to deeply understand soil types and changing seasons. A trader needed a reliable way to count goods and calculate profit. A ruler urgently needed to record complex laws and mounting debts. When the volume of information finally exceeded what human memory alone could carry, we adapted. Humans invented the tool of writing, and writing changed education permanently. For the very first time in history, knowledge could exist completely outside a human being. It could be stored on an object, copied endlessly, and outlive the person who created it. The first formal school in recorded history appeared in ancient Mesopotamia around 2500 BCE. The ancient Sumerians called this institution the Adaba, which translates to the House of Tablets. Archaeologists excavating Nippur in the late 19th century found something fascinating. They uncovered tens of thousands of clay tablets that were actually ancient student practice exercises. The exact same signs were copied over and over again on the clay. There were complex calculations, vocabulary lists, and the mundane homework of children. These children lived 4,500 years ago, preserved in hardened clay. The clay accidentally hardened when the school buildings around it burned to the ground. Students typically entered the Adaba before the age of 10. They graduated roughly 12 years later into a life of privilege and duty. During those years, they mastered cuneiform script, mathematics, agricultural science, and astronomy. But make no mistake, these ancient schools were absolutely not built to satisfy human curiosity. They were built for the survival of an expanding state bureaucracy. The Sumerian Empire desperately needed scribes and highly specialized administrators. They needed specialists who could record trade, manage wealth, and run the city machinery. Education had officially transformed into a powerful tool of the state. That profound shift changed the core purpose of learning forever. We moved from learning what you needed to survive to learning what the system needed you to know. That is a shift and a reality that we are still living inside today. Ancient Greece changed the question of education entirely. In 399 BCE, the great philosopher Socrates was executed by the state. He was killed because he asked too many uncomfortable, challenging questions. He had spent his entire life walking the streets of Athens using systematic questioning. This method, now called the Socratic method, forced people to examine their own beliefs. It forced them to confront what they actually knew versus what they simply assumed to be true. Socrates wrote absolutely nothing down during his entire lifetime. His classroom was wherever two people were willing to stand and argue passionately. His greatest student, Plato, was deeply shaken by the brutal execution of his master. In response, Plato founded the famous Academy in Athens in 387 BCE. This was a dedicated place where philosophy, mathematics, and ethics could be deeply studied. These subjects were studied not because they were useful to a government administrator. They were studied because they were deemed essential to truly understanding reality. There were no strict admission requirements except a genuine desire to engage with ideas. Above the grand entrance, according to ancient tradition, a warning was carved. It read, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here." Aristotle arrived at the academy at age 17 and stayed for 20 incredible years. He later founded his own school, the Lyceum, where he systematized human knowledge. He organized virtually every branch of knowledge that existed at the time. He laid the foundations for biology, physics, logic, ethics, politics, and literary theory. The modern academic disciplines we still use today carry the exact structure he gave them. In fact, the very word academy comes directly from Plato's ancient school. It established the beautiful idea that the goal of education is to develop human minds. It proved that education should not just be about producing obedient workers. This world-changing concept was born in a simple park outside Athens. It started among a handful of passionate people arguing in the cool